Hello class, this is Michelle Long, your instructor. Today we are going to be reviewing part 4, the basic sentence, and we're going to be focusing on chapter 20, which is subjects, verbs, and simple sentences. In your book, for the purposes of this podcast, I'm using the 4th edition. In the 4th edition, chapter 20 starts on page 388. And on page 389, there's a picture there with some captions underneath it. 3 of them are supposedly sentences. One of them is an actual sentence. But the thing I want to talk about is there has to be pieces together. And those pieces have to work together in order to formulate a sentence. If you don't have those pieces, then you do not have a sentence. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. So, if you look on page 389, and there's a picture of Venus Williams, and she is getting ready to play in the French Open. The first sentence is, swings a bottle of water in one long gulp. Okay, so, period. There's a period at the end, and it starts with a word. And the word happens to be capitalized. So anybody looking at that did not comprehend the material in that phrase would think, well, it looks like a sentence, so yeah, and then it probably is a sentence. Well, no, it's not. There are certain pieces that are missing. And the first and foremost that I see when I first look at it, you don't know who is swigging the bottle in one long gulp. And in looking at the picture, you might say, oh yes, well that's Venus Williams. But if the sentence or the phrase is by itself and it does not have a subject or whatever the sentence is about, then it is not a sentence. It would be a clause or it could be a phrase. The main parts of a sentence, the basic units of a sentence, you have to have a subject and you do have to have a verb. If you have one and not the other, then you do not have a sentence. A group of words can't be a sentence unless it includes both. And again, just as we saw the description in the book, it can very well look like a sentence, begin with a capital, end with a period, but without the subject and without the verb, you do not have a sentence. A subject can be a person, place, object, or topic. And in order to identify a subject, so let's say you get a question on the test and it asks you, identify the subject in the sentence. What you would want to do is you would ask yourself, where's the verb? Okay, so we found the verb in the sentence. Then what we do is we ask ourselves, who or what did this? Who or what did whatever the verb is in the sentence? Who or what is this? What is this sentence about? And that's how you identify a subject. You always, always, always have to have a subject in the sentence. A subject is someone who does something. As an example, there are 2 example sentences, and the first one is, biodiesel is a renewable fuel produced from plants or animal fat. Biodiesel is the subject because you're asking yourself, well, first you have to point out what the verb is, and you have to ask yourself, who or what is doing the verb? Biodiesel is the subject, and that is what the sentence is about. Jeannie laughed. Okay, so Jeannie is the subject. Jeannie is the one who is laughing. Subjects can be something rather than someone. As an example of renewable power, and it does not necessarily have to be just one word either. It can be more than one word. Renewable power is natural power. Verb is. What is natural power? Renewable power. And renewable power is the subject. And define the subject of the sentence. It's basically what the sentence is about. You're looking at, if you're watching a play, the play has a theme. With each sentence, the sentence has a theme, and the theme has a main character, and the main character is the subject. The subject of the sentence is often a noun, which it's the name of a person, place, thing, or idea, which we talked about in chapter 17. And the other thing you can do in finding the subject is ask yourself who or what is performing the action of the verb. There are two types of subjects. And if you look on page 391 in your book, you can have a simple subject or you can have a compound subject. Practice 2. You don't have to complete this practice, but we're just going to review it for the sake of this podcast. But basically what a simple subject is just one single person, place, object, topic. It could be a group of words expressing a complete thought, and sometimes the subject is implied. For example, you. You is a subject that actually is implied, and what implied means is it doesn't necessarily have to be stated in the sentence. It can be invisible in the sentence, but it's implied that you, the subject is you, and the subject is about you. A compound subject is a sentence that has more than one subject. It has two or more people, maybe places, objects, or topics. So, in the next slide here we have 3 examples of compound subjects. We have John and Peter fished. John and Peter are both the subjects. They are the ones that are performing the action in the sentence, John and Peter. If it was just John fished, then it would just be a simple subject. But because there are 2 subjects, John and Peter, that makes it a compound. The man and his son laughed. Who laughed? The man and his son. Man and son are 2 different people, therefore it is a compound subject. My wife and I knew. Wife and I are the subject. That makes it a compound subject because you're talking about more than one. The word that it's kind of like the action in the sentence, or it tells what the subject does. The verb kind of tells us what is going on in the sentence, and it gives any action or kind of a change in time and condition that takes place. Verbs can be a physical or mental action or process or state of being, and it's part of the predicate. Sometimes you will hear the word predicate. Predicate is simultaneous to verb, so they actually mean the same thing. Some people call it a predicate, some people call it a verb. Verb types. These are the verb types that we're going to be going over. We're going to be talking about linking verbs, action verbs, helping verbs, compound verbs, and main verbs. You certainly don't want to have all linking verbs or all action verbs in your paragraphs or in your essays when you're completing your paragraphs and essays. You want to be very, you want to have a lot of variety in your writing, and you want to have definitely different verb types. And as you write, you will be writing these verb types whether you even realize it or not. And we're just going to review them all. Page 392 in your book talks about linking verbs, and basically it does what it says. It links. It connects the subjects to other words that identify or modify it. Some examples of linking verbs. Alicia is an accountant. Alicia is a subject. Is the verb. Accountant is the word that's modifying Alicia or identifying Alicia. Therefore, Alicia and accountant are virtually the same people. Therefore, it is linking Alicia and accountant. Harold looks tired. Harold is the subject, looks is the verb, and tired is the adverb that's describing the verb. So Harold and tired go hand in hand. And looks is basically just linking the 2 of them. Mary seems happy to be home. Mary is the subject, seems is the verb, and happy is the word that is describing Mary. So, seems, yes, it is a verb, but there's a type of verb that it is, and it's a linking verb because it links Mary and it links happy. So you want to definitely memorize your linking verbs, and those are listed on page 392. Common linking verbs are am, is, are, was, were, seems, become, and appear. These are your typical linking verbs that you normally see on a day-to-day basis, and it basically just describes or renames the subjects. It helps, the verbs help a word describe or rename the subject. And again, it does as it states. It links a verb to a noun or to an adjective. As an example, again, the patient seems agitated. So when you see seems, that's probably one of the more commonly used linking verbs. You're linking patient and agitated because they're one and the same. An action verb is used to indicate physical action. So action, basically, what is an action? An action is something that is being done. And that is kind of exactly what an action verb is. It's something that is happening, like running, ran, walking, throwing. So these are all actions. And you may see actions as a verb type in a sentence. They're modified by adverbs, and they can complete the action by indicating when something happens, where, how, or to what extent. Action verbs are probably the easiest type of verbs to point out because there's an action. Something has to be happening. And it tells us what the subject did. As an example, Mary jumped off of the chair. Mary is the subject, jumped. Jumped is the action verb. Peter threw the ball. Threw is the action verb. Adam wrote the essay. Wrote is the action verb. The dental assistant prepared the instruments carefully. Prepared is the action verb. The hospital staff evacuated the patients efficiently. Evacuated is the action verb. Action being performed. The difference between the two, it's important to be able to differentiate a linking verb from an action verb. A linking verb is just, again, what it says. It's linking two things. An action doesn't link anything. It's just something that's happening. So, as an example, the surgeon appeared gentle and understanding. Okay. Appeared is the verb. We're looking at gentle and understanding, and the reason why I have that underlined is because gentle and understanding are adjectives that are describing the surgeon. So I don't really see the surgeon doing any action here. There's no action happening. Basically, the surgeon is appearing something. He's or she is appearing gentle and understanding. So Mary is in the hospital waiting room. Mary is in the hospital waiting room. Here, you would think that is could possibly be an action verb, but it is not an action verb in this particular situation. It is linking. And as it's stated above in the slide, a linking verb could be followed. And basically what followed means is there's something that's coming after the linking verb. And that could be either an adjective, which we saw in number 1, or 2 adjectives, or a prepositional phrase is actually what we're seeing here. We're going to be learning more about prepositional phrases later on, but I can tell it's a prepositional phrase because it starts with a preposition, and in the hospital waiting room is the phrase. You'll know after you've memorized all 75 of your prepositions that in is probably one of the more commonly used prepositions. Is a linking verb, and that makes it a linking verb because it's followed directly by a prepositional phrase immediately after. My neighbor is a neurologist. Is a linking verb here as well because it's linking neighbor and neurologist, and it's okay that neurologist is a noun. Doesn't necessarily have to be just an adjective or a prepositional phrase. It can also be a noun. That makes is a linking verb. Verbs sometimes need additional words, and additional words is, when you think of addition, you think of help. Helping verbs have more than one word in there. So is, would not be really a helping verb. Appears, not a helping verb. But a helping verb usually has maybe 2 or 3 words in the phrase to make it a verb. And it expresses past, present, and future. It kind of lets us know when and under what conditions the action of the main verb took place. Helping verbs work with the main verbs to communicate when an action takes place. As an example, the chickens have come home to roost. Okay, so I'm looking at that sentence and I'm wondering what the verb is. Well, I see the verb is come. So there is some other words in addition to kind of help that verb show some kind of a time or show some kind of a condition, and there happens to be a word before that that is have, and that indicates when the chickens came home. The chickens have come home to roost. Have indicates that they've come home sometime before now, not right now, because if we didn't have in that sentence, you would think the chickens came home right now. But have indicates sometime before now. They've already come home. The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. Can tells us when the devil cites scripture. Because if you were to just say the devil cites scripture for his purpose, that's fine also. But because you have can in there, that makes it can cite is the verb. Can cite is the helping verb. The helping word that helps the verb is can. And it tells us when the devil cites scripture, which is now. The complete verb in a sentence includes the main verbs and the helping verbs. So the main verb is the very main verb. That's the verb that you can have without the helping verb. That's considered the verb. Now the helping verb is exactly what it does. It just helps the verb give you more of an idea of when something happened. When the verb. As an example, the chickens have come home to roost. So I know we mentioned this before. This is kind of a duplicate slide, but after seeing the last slide, now I would like you to see actually what the main verb is. The main verb is come. The helping is have, because you can't say the chickens have home to roost. That wouldn't make sense. The main verb can stand on its own. The chickens come home to roost. But have is that helping verb. The devil can cite. Cite is the main and can is the helping. So just know to differentiate between the two. You can have one without the other, but the other one helps the main. The nurse prepares the medication. Some more examples. The nurse prepares the medication. And looking at that, we need to think, which one is that? Which one is that? Okay. Well, prepares, you're actually doing something. The nurse is actually doing something with her hands. She's performing an action. That would be considered an action verb. The patient seems agitated because seems is the most commonly used linking verb. I just know because I memorized my linking verbs that I know seems is the linking verb, but I also know that it links patient and agitated. The medical team will meet with the family. Normally, if you see more than one verb and you have one word that helps the main verb, then you know that it's a verb phrase and it's a helping verb. So these are the three different we've just learned. Fragments are incomplete sentences, and we're going to probably talk more about that towards the end of the term after we've gone through learning how to create a paragraph and how to create an essay. Fragments are probably the most difficult thing to try to prevent in your writing, because a lot of times as you're writing you forget a paragraph. Sometimes pieces of sentence become disconnected and the punctuation is unclear or is nowhere to be found. Or other times you might have punctuation that is there that does not need to be there, and you can actually rearrange the sentence to make it look correct. Sentence fragments, there's a lot to sentence fragments, and a lot of times this is probably one of the most commonly seen errors when I am looking at students' work and critiquing them. As an example, she had always wanted to be a financial manager, but had not had the needed education. So you need to look at each one of your sentences when you write. You can't just write, and be done, and then send it. You have to go back and read and reread all of your sentences to make sure that all of your sentence structure is accurate. She had always wanted to be a financial manager is perfectly fine. You have a subject, you have a verb. It makes sense. It has to make sense. It has to be a complete thought. You need a subject, you need a verb, it has to be a complete thought. The next sentence immediately following, but had not had the needed education. Well, we do have a verb, yes, that's fine, but we do not have a subject. We have no idea what this author or what the person that wrote the sentence is talking about. They don't know who the person is that needed the education, have no idea. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to change the sentence punctuation to make it written accurately. Subjects after verbs. In some instances, a writer may choose to place the subject after the verb, and that's perfectly fine. We're going to talk about the fill process when we discover and learn about prepositional phrases. There and here are never the subjects of the sentence. A sentence may also have a compound verb, and a compound verb is just more than one verb. So you might have one word as the verb, or you may have more than one verb. And when you have more than one verb, that makes it a compound verb. Just like we were talking about compound subjects, sometimes you can have a compound verb. You can actually have a compound subject and a compound verb all in the same sentence, and that's perfectly fine. John fished and hunted. Fished and hunted are compound verbs. The man talked and laughed. If we're just talking about the man talked, period, it would just be considered a simple verb. This is a compound verb because not only did the man talk, but he laughed. I knew and understood. Knew and understood are both verbs. Since we have more than one verb, we call it a compound. Here is an example where we have a compound subject and a compound verb all in the same sentence, and that's perfectly fine. The compound subject, we are actually talking about more than two people. So you can have more than two people in your subject. John, Peter, Tom, and Harry are all the subject. They are all the subject. And because there are four of them, that makes it a compound subject. Fished and hunted are both verbs, and that makes the verb a compound verb because they both not only fished, but they also hunted. There are three basic sentence types. And the sentence types are simple, compound, and complex. We're going to be going over all three of these in this podcast. Basically, there's nothing fancy. It's just your basic, everyday, run-of-the-mill sentence. The children laugh at the monkeys, run away from the tigers, and feel the goats. The children, it is one subject, children. You have laugh, run, and feel. That makes it a compound verb. It still does not stray away from the fact that it is still a simple sentence. And I'm going to explain to you why that is a simple sentence. Prepositions. Okay, there are about 75 of them, and I will include an attachment in Moodle that give you all of your prepositions, and I would like you to take a look at them and look them over and look them over again and again. I know it's hard to memorize 70 to 80 prepositions, but you can see the ones that are in there that are more commonly used. Just memorize those, please. A preposition is a word that shows the relationship between two things. It always has an object, usually a noun or pronoun. And the phrase that has the preposition that it starts with the preposition is called a prepositional phrase. And basically what that is a group of words beginning with a preposition. Here is an example of a prepositional phrase, and you can see the formula that I've placed on top of the slide. If you have a preposition plus the object, then you have a prepositional phrase. But it has to have a preposition and it has to have an object. Sometimes in the middle you may see an article such as the, and the is the most commonly used one in prepositional phrases, but there are many others. On is the preposition and the object is table. On the table. On where? The table, which is the object of the preposition on. The object of the preposition can never be the subject of the sentence. Very, very important. And this gets confused so easily that I see this all the time. The object of the preposition can never be the subject of a sentence. Kind of like someone who's locked away in prison. Will never be out of prison ever again. Maybe they will be, but an object in the prepositional phrase is kind of like being in prison, and it will never come out of prison. And it stays kind of locked in its cage there, in the prepositional phrase cage, and it can't be used as a very important thing in a sentence, which is the subjects. It's kind of locked in its little cage there. So we'll talk more about that. The verb of a sentence agrees with the subject, not the preposition. Here is an example where we have a sentence with the applications for the job are on the desk. If somebody were to say to you, okay, great, look at this sentence. Where is the subject? If somebody were to say to you, okay, well, yeah, the subject is desk. No, this is an example of where desk is the object of the preposition on. And as you can see by my little swirly line there, that on the desk is the prepositional phrase. This is kind of like what I'm talking about, the little, it's like looking in its little cage. On the desk is in its cage. And because desk is in that little prepositional phrase, cage, we can't pull it out. We can't use it for the subject. It has to stay with the phrase. So what we then need to do is just kind of box that out or circle it or kind of, pull it away from the sentence and look to the rest of the sentence to see to yourself, okay, well then where's the subject? If desk is not the subject, then where would the subject be? The subject is applications. And because it ends with an S, it makes it plural, which is fine. But because we have a plural subject, then we need to have a plural verb, and the plural verb is are. What we basically use to find the prepositional phrases and then identify what is in the prepositional phrases, but the first thing we have to do is actually find that phrase first. This is called the fill process, F-I-L. And F stands for finding the prepositional phrases. So before we do anything in a sentence, even before we see the verb or the subject, before we can pull that out, what we want to do is look to see where our prepositional phrases are, and either circle them, highlight them, box them, and then we need to look. The second thing we need to do is I, and that is identify the verb. Because the reason why we have to identify the verb second is because then we need to determine who is doing that verb. And then that is the third thing, which is L, and that is locating the subject. You have to locate the subject last, and that's done purposely in this particular order. So if you can remember the FIL, I'm going to be giving you an exercise to do, which is actually use the fill process to dissect your sentences and determine where your prepositional phrases are where your verb is and where your subjects are. Infinitives versus prepositions, sometimes you will see this because to is, it does look like it could possibly be a preposition, which can be confusing, but if you have the word to, and infinitives are only used with the word to, which makes it easier because prepositions you can use with many more words. But infinitives are to, and then it does not have an article and then an object of a preposition. Infinitives have to, and then you would have a verb. Pete wanted to walk. Okay, there's no article between to and walk is not an object of a preposition to, therefore walk is a verb. Walk is a verb. To walk would then be the infinitive. Pete gave the apple to Fred. You can actually have it with a noun also, as long as there's no article between. To and then the noun. That makes it an infinitive. He wanted to disappear. If you have a noun or if you have a verb after the word to, then it becomes an infinitive. So basically, in a nutshell, what we've learned today are just typically putting your sentences together, making sure that your sentences are constructed properly, and this is going to help us segue into the next phase of the term, which is then creating paragraphs. We're going to learn how to create paragraphs, then we're going to learn how to create essays. But we do need to know the basics first, because in order to sit down and learn all of this construction, we need to know the basics, and that is your grammar and your sentence structure. So thank you, and I hope this podcast has been very helpful to you.